nobody ever thinks the city will fall while we're still living in it because concrete, lights, sirens, and infrastructure create the illusion of permanence. And people confuse permanence with safety until the moment those systems stop responding. And then they realize how thin the margin really was. And cities don't collapse loudly at first, they glitch. They lag, they hesitate, and then one day the response time stretches too long. The shelves don't get restocked, the power flickers, and the rules everyone relied on suddenly stop being enforced evenly. And this episode isn't about fantasy, none of those types of scenarios or end of the world theatrics. It's about understanding how urban environments change when order degrades and what mindset you need to survive that transition without becoming a victim of panic, desperation, or false confidence. And once again, this is Panzer Unleashed. And today we're going to be talking about urban survival when everything collapses, not through fear, people, but through clarity. And the first thing you need to understand about urban collapse is that the city itself doesn't turn dangerous all at once. It becomes unpredictable, and unpredictability is what kills unprepared people faster than anything else in the world. And when systems fail, the environment doesn't suddenly announce new rules, people. It simply stops following the old ones. And people who continue acting like yesterday still applies are the ones who get caught off guard first. And survival in an urban environment starts with awareness, people, because information becomes more valuable than supplies. And, the moment official channels become unreliable and the people who are paying attention early always have more options because they're the ones who are always prepared. And those people are the smart ones in the bunch. And that means you people, you need to stop assuming services are going to work on demand. You need to stop assuming that help is going to arrive quickly. And you stop assuming crowds are neutral because crowds under stress behave differently than crowds under normal conditions. Because trust me, when shit pops off, the lions ain't going to be friendly with the zebras, people. Just remember that. And one of the biggest mistakes people make during collapse is staying mentally anchored to comfort because they keep trying to preserve normal routines instead of adapting to changing conditions. And that hesitation creates exposure. Adaptation, it does not mean panic. And it does not mean reckless action. It means adjusting expectations early so that every decision you make is grounded in reality rather than hope. And urban survival requires understanding density, people, because density magnifies everything, including fear, scarcity, and misinformation and conflict. And the closer people are packed together like sardines, the faster situations escalate without warning. Oh, yeah, trust me, people. That's why mobility and flexibility matter more than control because in a dense environment, you can't dominate space. You can only move through it intelligently. And people who survive urban collapses are rarely the loudest or the strongest. They're the ones who know when to stay fucking put, when they move and when to disappear into the background. without drawing attention. And visibility becomes a liability when order breaks down because attention attracts questions, desperation, and problems you don't want. So blending in often keeps you safer than standing out. And situational awareness in a collapsing city means watching behavior. Oh, yeah, like you never done before. Not headlines, because people are going to tell you one thing and other things are going to be going on. And when the lines form earlier than usual, people, when stores change policies quietly, when security increases in subtle ways, and when people start acting tense over small inconveniences, those are signals, not coincidences, people. The water, power, and the access, it defines survival in urban environments because cities they're not designed for self-sufficiency. And the moment those inputs slow down, that illusion of stability starts cracking quick, people. That doesn't mean you go panic buy or go hoard recklessly. It means you understand dependencies and reduce your exposure to single points of failure whenever possible. A calm survivor, you got to think in layers because redundancy keeps small problems from becoming catastrophic ones, okay? And having options always beats having the best solution that only works under, perfect conditions. And shelter in an urban collapse isn't just about having a roof. It's about choosing environments that reduce risks, noise, visibility, and traffic because safety often comes from being overlooked rather than fortified. And movement through a city during instability, it should always be deliberate because unnecessary travel, it increases exposure and every trip outside becomes a calculation instead of a routine. And you learn quickly, people, that timing matters more than speed because moving at the wrong time, it puts you in contact with stressed systems and stressed people. And that combination rarely ends well. You know how that goes. And, one of the most dangerous phases of collapse is the early denial stage when people still believe order is still taking shape, that it's just going to snap back at any moment. But because that's when frustrations spike and that's when the tempers shorten. That later comes the normalization of dysfunction and where people adapt to the scarcity and rules, it just change informally. And by then, the environment rewards those who planned ahead and punishes those who wait on the sidelines. And, that mental discipline is critical, people. Yeah, don't wait around. Trust me, because fear, that's going to narrow perception. And it's going to narrow that perception. It's going to lead to those bad decisions, and that's not going to work. You can't just think tactically if you are emotionally flooded, which is why controlling stress responses matters just as much as understanding the environment itself. And that unpredictability is why flexibility beats everything. Because those rigid plans, when they collapse under changing conditions, while adaptable minds adjust without freezing. And community matters in collapse, people, but blind trust does not. Because desperation changes incentives. And alliances formed under stress require boundaries, communication and realism. Because you're not just going to trust some dust head, in the middle of the flames flickering. Survival is not about becoming isolated or aggressive. It's about balancing cooperation with caution because neither extremes work for long, in any dense environment. You also need to understand that information spreads faster than the truth during a collapse. And rumors can cause more chaos than actual shortages, which is why emotional restraint and critical thinking becomes survival skills. People who react to every rumor, exhaust themselves early. While people who verify, observe, and wait and for that clarity, they'll be better off. And energy management becomes a form of survival, people, because fatigue compounds stress. Stress degrades judgment, and degraded judgment turns manageable situations into disasters. And the urban environments drain energy faster during collapses because everything takes longer, requires a lot more effort, and carries more friction. So, pacing yourself is not weakness, people, it's strategy. And the goal is not to conquer the environment, it's to outlast the most chaotic phases without making irreversible mistakes. And survival in a city isn't about winning, it's about staying intact until stability returns or safe transition becomes possible. And the people who make it through are rarely the ones who thought they were prepared for everything. And they're the ones who respected uncertainty and stayed adaptable when plans fell apart. And as I said, people, cities, they don't collapse in movies the way they do in real life because real collapse, it's slow, it's quieter, and far more psychological than people expect. And the ones who survive are the ones who recognize the shift early and adjust without that panic. And urban survival, it's about toughness, not all the time or bravado. It's about the awareness, discipline, adaptability, and the ability to reclaim yourself under those stress environments, to be grounded, to be one. And you don't need to fear collapse to respect it, people. And you don't need to fantasize about chaos to prepare for uncertainty. Because preparation is responsibility 101. Not paranoia, not Mr. Bug Out guy. End of the days, like I said, that's good. And readiness is built long before anything goes wrong, people. So remember that. This is Panzer Unleashed. And the message is simple, even if the reality isn't. When the city goes dark, when the noise fades, and when the system stops answering, the people who survive will not be the ones who panic first, but the ones who stayed clear-headed when it mattered most. Stay aware, stay disciplined, and don't wait for collapse to teach you a lesson you could have learned in advance, people. Once again, this is Scott Panzer Paulson reporting live from Hack Studios. Over and out.